Emily Carter had not planned to be anywhere near a helm again, let alone on the bridge of a ship big enough to cast its own weather across the sea. But life has a way of dragging certain people back to the controls when everything begins to fail. She had come aboard the Panstar Aegis as a systems consultant for the new engine control software, a civilian among uniforms, observing drills, logging notes, keeping to herself while the crew ferried containers and humanitarian supplies up the Pacific coast. She preferred the quiet anonymity of checklists and diagnostics, and the ocean, for its part, had behaved like a placid machine. Long swells, a clean barometer, radar painting traffic in tidy arcs. By mid-afternoon, the light had flattened to silver, and a soft rain speckled the bridge windows. The captain, a weathered Scot named McAllister, stood centerline with a mug of black coffee. The first officer ran ECDIS updates, and Emily leaned against the chart table, tracing the lilac ribbon of their intended track line. Routine, predictable, safe. Then the sea twitched. It was subtle at first, a slower heave in the deck, as if someone had reached below the keel and tugged. The helmsman frowned at the compass repeater. A low-frequency shudder crawled through the hull and up into the soles of their boots. From the corner of her eye, Emily watched the roll angle spike half a degree, then two. The rain stitched sideways. Far on the western horizon, the sky took on that bruised color sailors do not like to name. The captain set down his mug, dead quiet. "Weather update," he said. "Now." The officer of the watch pulled the satellite chart again, tapped the swirls. "Tropical depression split north overnight, sir. But there's chatter on the coastal nets about a subsea quake west of the ridge. Magnitude under debate. Some stations say the seabed jumped." "Quake?" Emily asked before she could stop herself. "We'd feel that in wave behavior before instruments catch up," McAllister said, already moving. "Sound the all-call. Close watertight doors. Rig for heavy weather." The ship's general alarm sounded 3 long pulses that vibrated in sternum and teeth. Hatches slammed. The bosun's voice barked over the PA. "All hands secure. Lash deck cargo. Dog all doors. Heavy weather stations." On ECDIS, the captain had the officer run a weather overlay. Colors bled from yellow to violent red. The sea outside turned uneven, sharp ridges punching at the bow. A gust slammed the windows with spray, and the frame rattled. Emily put her palm on the console to steady herself and felt the vessel's great muscles begin to flex for a fight. The swell built quickly, too quickly for the usual physics. "Barometer," McAllister snapped. "Falling fast," the first officer said. 2 millibars in 6 minutes. "That's not a storm front," Emily murmured. "That's displacement." The radio crackled with fragmentary calls, fishing boats chattering in clipped Spanish, a harbor pilot advising all small craft to make harbor, a coastal emergency channel switching from routine weather to urgent alerts. Then the starboard radar lit with bright returns that were not ships, not rain, not normal sea clutter, but something like a wall, long and uneven, rushing shoreward. The navigator zoomed out. The line ran like a seam across the screen, wide as a county. McAllister exchanged a brief look with Emily, the kind that holds a decision. "Tsunami protocol," he said, calm as a surgeon. "Turn her seaward. Make for deep water where the wavelength lifts." The helmsman threw the wheel to starboard. The engine telegraph clacked as the chief on the other end pushed the revolutions up. The bow swung, sluggish under the weight of stacked containers. Across the windows, the horizon sank into charcoal. Waves shouldered into waves, chop atop chop, wind shear sharpening the faces. Emily stepped forward to the forward console, where an auxiliary steering tiller stood like a forgotten relic. "Manual steering ready," she said without thinking. "Autopilot off." "Aye." The helmsman breathed, grateful to put human hands between ship and water. The first major sea hit them 30 degrees on the bow, a slab of green water that lifted the nose and then punched sideways. Everything on the bridge slid 2 inches. Coffee leaped from cups, the deck canted, the wipers stuttered across glass white with foam. Emily gripped the console. "We need ballast to starboard," she said. "She'll roll like a drunk if we don't stiffen her." McAllister was already on the intercom to the engine room. "Chief, shift ballast starboard and forward. I want her nose heavy enough to bite. Close all fire dampers. Prepare for blackout contingencies. And watch the cooling intakes. We're going to start eating water." The chief's voice came back like gravel. Copy. Ballasting now. Generators ready. Sea chests will cavitate in this chop. We'll nurse them. The ship turned her lean shoulder to the west, climbing. Every squeak of steel on steel, every clank of a loose chain, every distant bang of a container settling felt magnified. On AIS, icons of coastal boats scattered like startled birds, some turning toward harbors they would not reach in time. The VHF erupted with a distress call barely intelligible beneath wind. Trawler Santa Lucia, engine out. 3 souls, taking water. The captain tapped the speaker mute with regret carved tight around his eyes. We can't stop for them, he said quietly to Emily. Nod and live to help anyone else. Emily nodded, throat tight. Send coordinates to Coast Guard. We'll do what we can on the net. She slid the DSC distress relay across the console, pinging the position to every receiver in range, then hammered a quick message over digital selective calling for nearby tugs. Outside the windows, the sea had lost all pretense of rhythm. There was no long heave, only chaos stacked on chaos. The ship's bow hit a wave that felt like rock, burst through it, then fell into a hollow that tried to twist the vessel broadside. The helmsman fought the wheel. The roll angle ticked to 12 degrees, then 14. Containers groaned. The bosun's voice came again. Deck cargo secured. Crew accounted. Portside lashings tight. We've got green water over number 2 hatch. Maintain heading, McAllister said, voice flat to keep the terror out of it. Ride them at 45. Don't let them on the beam. 45 and biting, the helmsman echoed, as if the words themselves added steel to the keel. Another call cut through the radio bedlam, this one from a research station farther west. All stations be advised, second displacement wave confirmed. First wave arrival at coastline T-20. Offshore seas irregular, multiple crest trains. Deep water refuge recommended. McAllister glanced at the depth display and did the math. We need another 10 miles off, he said. Give me every turn she'll take without throwing a blade. Emily leaned toward the engine telegraph. Chief, we need 14 knots through this mess. You'll get 12 and a prayer, the chief growled back. If I give you 14, we'll suck air and melt bearings. Give me peak torque on the upslope, Emily said. Feather when we pitch down. I'll call the rhythm. She watched the bow rise, counted under her breath, felt the moment the prop began to cavitate in the froth, then pressed the talk switch. Feather now? Torque now. To her own surprise, the engine's song and the sea's staggered beat braided in her head like music, and she called the cadence as if she had been steering ships rather than aircraft all her life. The first wave found them in deepening water where tsunamis are less a breaker than a vast, sudden hill of ocean. The barometer had bottomed, the wind tasted metallic, and in the gray distance the western horizon simply rose. Not like a movie, the ocean did not rear up in a vertical wall, but like the earth itself was listing. There, the navigator said, pale. Jesus. We meet it head on, McAllister said. No quartering this. Helm, steady on 270. 270, I. Emily braced one hand on the console and one on the emergency tiller. Bow down into it. Don't let her fall off. The ship began to climb. Everything slowed, like the second before a car crests a hill and your stomach waits behind your ribs. The decks groaned. The forward windows went dark as the wave face rose above the bridge, and for a full second it seemed as if they were driving the ship into a green mountain. Then momentum and steel and a trillion small calculations won a thin margin, and the bow punched through. Water exploded over the superstructure, hammered the roof, geysered past the wipers. The ship hung, weightless, and then slithered down the backside into a valley so deep the horizon disappeared. The rudder bit weakly in aerated water. The wheel went light in the helmsman's hands. Emily felt it and kicked a whisper of emergency steering, enough to keep the bow straight until the water densified under the keel. Again, the first officer cried, voice breaking as a second crest charged them. We've got another train. We keep her nose there, Emily said, more to the ship than to the men. We keep her nose there, and she'll carry us. The second wave took a different shape, steep-sided and mean, collapsing as it ran. It tried to slap the bow offline. The ship responded with a sullen twist. Containers groaned. Somewhere below, a wrench clanged across decking. Alarms flickered in angry reds and ambers. A gust punched the starboard quarter and tried to broach them. Emily threw her shoulder against the tiller, felt the hydraulic pushback, and muttered to the steel, an old pilot's habit carried to a new cockpit. "Stay with me. Stay." The crest broke on the port bow and green water slammed into the window, so hard the glass bowed and the seams squealed. For a heartbeat, visibility was 0. Then the wipers carved sight back into the world, thin and shaking. "Roll 19 degrees, the first officer reported. "Cargo holding. Ballast responding." "Chief," McAllister asked. "Generators hot, but alive," came the reply. "Portside bilge pumps kicked. We're drinking a bit from the hatchways, but nothing she can't swallow. Maintain." Emily realized the crew was stealing glances at her. Not at the captain, not at the instruments, but at the woman with her hands where the ship met the sea, calling the engine beats like a drummer in a storm. She didn't want their awe. She wanted their attention and their steadiness, and she had both. The third wave wasn't as tall as the first two, but it came tangled with rogue wind seas that slapped from odd angles, trying to shear their momentum away. The deck shuddered under a confused chop. A container on the forward stack squealed and shifted half a foot in its cradle. "Bosun to bridge," the radio snapped. "We've got play on B3. Request permission to send a man." McAllister's jaw set. "Denied. Nobody on deck." "Understood." The bosun didn't argue. He just said, quieter, "Hold her straight, skipper." "We intend to." Over the next 40 minutes they rode the train. A procession of deformed hills rolling rapidly shoreward, each one moderated by the deep water they fought to reach. Behind them, the radar showed coastline impacts like an EKG gone wild. Harbors spiked, then blanked as instruments went under. Emily relayed Mayday traffic when she could wedge words into the radio's bedlam, sending automated position beacons for vessels that were too small to be heard above the sea's roar. When the wave train finally thinned and the sea remembered how to breathe, the sky opened in torn strips and a sulfuric light spilled under the clouds. They had made it far enough offshore to ride the worst as lift rather than break. The bridge exhaled all at once, a communal surrender of held breath. Someone laughed the kind of laugh that shakes itself out of your bones, then quickly clapped a hand over his mouth as if the sea would hear and punish the glee. The helmsman looked at Emily, and only now did she notice the ache in her forearms, the imprint her fingers had left in the rubber of the tiller. McAllister touched her shoulder, a weighty, grateful pat. "You kept her nose true," he said simply, which among mariners is the rawest praise there is. Emily started to answer and stopped because the horizon ahead lifted again, not in a single huge swell this time, but in a chaotic procession of cross seas birthed by reflection and refraction from the continental shelf. The storm proper had not even truly arrived. Wind found its long scream. "We're not done," she said. "No," McAllister agreed. "But we bought ourselves a future to finish the job." The job, it turned out, was not only to keep themselves alive, but to become a moving refuge in a broken sea. The Coast Guard cut through the radio chatter with a clear directive: regional ports damaged, debris fields expanding, multiple small craft unaccounted for. The Aegis, with its height, power, and open deck, was instructed to act as a relay and a shield while cutters scrabbled their way outward. "We can heave to and make a lee for the small ones," Emily said. "Put our bulk between them and the worst of it. Let them snake into our wake one by one." McAllister nodded. "Helm, bring her to a slow ahead. Hold into the wind for a windward lee. Engineering, give me steady RPM, no surprises. Bosun, rig lines and throw bags aft. Medical, prep blankets and hot packs. Anyone we bring up is going to be half drowned and frozen." They turned the Aegis into a wall with a heart. The ship shouldered the seas at just enough speed to keep authority on the rudder, carving out a corridor of less violent water to leeward. Emily took the con while McAllister coordinated the dance on radios, and the first officer became a second set of eyes. One by one, blips appeared at the edge of sight. An aluminum skiff with a blown-out board, a cabin cruiser riding bow-high and terrified, a battered pilot boat with two harbor cops white-knuckled at the rail. Emily feathered the rudder to widen the lee as each approached, letting them tuck close without losing them to the undertow that clawed along the ship's flank. Deckhands in bright immersion suits leaned out with heaving lines and hauled people aboard when they had to. Twice Emily made the judgment call to let a boat keep station alongside rather than attempt a transfer, reading hull shape and wave harmonics the way another person might read a face. Not now, she murmured at one skipper over VHF when he begged to come alongside. Ride there. Trust me. I know what the water wants to do to you. He listened. 15 minutes later, the worst of the reflected chop eased, and they piped his wife and son aboard with nothing broken but a railing and pride. The night came with a vengeance. The storm's second act stacked wind against remnant surge and turned the sea into black iron. On the bridge, the inside world funneled to instruments and the hypnotic slash of wipers. Fatigue clawed at them, but decisions did not slow. Adjust ballast again as fuel burned down. Throttle down to keep the rudder biting when aeration turned the wake to milk. Trim the bow when a deep, ugly cross swell arrived 7 beats after the main train. Seal a weeping seam on a window with emergency compound because the ocean had found a thumb's breadth to press. Somewhere around midnight, the emergency generator hiccuped and the bridge dipped into a brownout that lasted a breath and a curse. Emily's teeth flashed in a humorless grin. Not tonight, she told the ship, and the generator, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of luck, caught again. Near 2 in the morning, the radio caught a mayday so faint it sounded like a ghost. A fishing cooperative from a small harbor had pushed out into what they thought would be refuge, and now were trapped in a maze of floating timber, broken dock, and shipping crates peeled from their lashings miles up coast. Coordinates came garbled, then clearer as a relay station stitched the message. The debris field was downwind of the Aegis's current position and moving. McAllister looked at Emily. No need to speak. We can't plow into it blind, she said, mental models already mapping. But we can lie just to weather of their track, give them a windbreak and a reference, shepherd them onto our quarter where the trash is thinner. Use our searchlights. And we'll need sound, horn intervals, steady, so they can home in when they lose sight in the spray. Make it so, McAllister said, not out of theater, but because that's how old captains agree to difficult plans. The ship angled to interpose herself between a migrating raft of wreckage and the cluster of little boats. Searchlights clawed white tunnels across the black, lighting arcs of water and torn wood that slid by with suicidal grace. Emily inched speed down until the rudder threatened to lose bite, then up until she could feel steerage return in the wheel. The horn sounded its low-bellied note at deliberate intervals. On radar, the small returns slithered closer. One skiff emerged from spray with a boy at the tiller and a woman crouched at the bow gripping a battery lantern. They looked impossibly small and impossibly alive. Emily opened the lee and let them tuck in as if sliding behind a moving barn. A voice broke over the radio in accented English. Big ship, please, we have 3 more behind us. Bring them into our wake, McAllister answered. Stay on my quarter. Don't cut close. Emily threaded them forward, weaving her path through rivers of debris, feeling the Aegis's bulk alter the sea in ways that didn't show on any display. The line of little boats lengthened, battered but intact, a convoy under the wing of a giant. When the last of them cleared the worst of the wreckage and the sea widened, someone on the lead skiff stood and tried to salute. The motion turned into a shiver and then a sob instead. No one on the bridge said anything. Around dawn, the wind eased like a fever breaking. The sky turned the bruised yellow of a fresh healing. Spray softened. The wave faces lengthened back into something that resembled waves instead of malice. The crew on the bridge were gaunt with the all-night fight, stubble blue and salt-crusted, but their eyes were bright. They had too many aboard and not enough of everything hot. They had done triage with coffee and blankets and dry socks. They had saved more people than anyone would be able to count from a ledger. The Coast Guard finally reached them with cutters muscling through spent rage. Transfers began in a series of careful dances played out in almost gentle seas. The little boats peeled away toward a harbor that was not the one they had left, but that would do. McAllister turned at last to Emily and, in place of eloquence, simply lifted the spare captain's cap from a peg and set it on the console beside her hand. I don't give those away, he said. And I'm not giving this one away either. I'm just letting it live up here where you already were. Emily wanted to protest, still the same deflection that had kept her humble and half-hidden after landing a plane no sane person would have tried to land. But the bridge crew had begun to clap, awkward at first, and then not. She swallowed and rested her palm on the cap, a promise without the need for ceremony. Later, when the Aegis steamed slowly back toward a bruised coastline to deliver her rescued to hands waiting on broken piers, messages began to arrive on every channel a modern world can invent. Grainy phone video from a pilot boat showed the big ship cutting a groove of safer water with a woman at the center window, jaws set, arms locked on the controls. A fishing cooperative posted a photo of 7 tiny boats riding in the lee of an iron mountain, captioned only, "She made us a road." A coastal emergency station sent the log of distress calls relayed and answered because a civilian on a bridge had found space between chaos to transmit clarity. One note arrived old-fashioned. Paper, pencil, shoved into a plastic bottle that someone had scooped from a scupper and left on the chart table. Inside, cramped handwriting in Spanish. "You did not know our names, but you held the wind for us. Gracias, Capitana." Emily stood alone at the window once the bridge fell silent, watching the sea tamp itself back into anonymity. The instruments no longer screamed. The ship thrummed with the smug fatigue of a champion. She lifted her gaze to the line where water meets sky and felt that familiar, humbling current move through her, the one that had shown up in a cockpit when a jet became a glider, and again now when a vessel tried to become a reef and failed because she would not let it. She hadn't wanted the responsibility back, hadn't asked for it, hadn't sought its spotlight or its weight. But responsibility had a way of finding her in rooms with controls and in moments when panic needed a still voice. She touched the window with 2 knuckles as if to knock on the sea itself. "Thank you for lifting," she whispered. Behind her, Boots approached. McAllister's voice, softer than the man looked, said, "The Coast Guard wants our night in their after-action notes. They'll want your name spelled right." "Put the ship first," Emily said, almost smiling. She did the heavy work. "Ships are steel and math," he said. "What you did was seamanship. And something else I can't log. We'll call it courage and leave the definition to the poets." On the quayside, a crowd had gathered despite damage and sirens and smoke. When the Aegis lay alongside with the grace of a dancer somehow not tired yet, people on land raised hands and hats and signs scrawled on cardboard. "Thank you, Aegis. Thank you, Captain. Thank you, woman on the bridge." The crew began to move the rescued down gangways that had seen nothing nobler. A Coast Guard commander came aboard with a clipboard and a face that had weathered too many nights like this one. He looked from McAllister to Emily and back, then nodded without flourish. "You turned a freighter into a lifeboat," he said. "You probably kept our casualty count in double digits instead of triple." Emily, who could never accept praise without passing it along, said, "We were lucky enough to have deep water when we needed it. And we had each other." The commander tilted his head. "Luck favors those who read a sea that's changed shape. I've served with men who wouldn't have turned to face that wave. You did. That's the story." When the paperwork and the handshakes had ebbed, the Aegis went back out because a ship built to carry and protect does not rest while there are still names missing on blotters. Emily stayed aboard, not because anyone ordered her to, but because she could not imagine stepping away while the horizon still held unanswered questions. She stood again at the forward console, rain ticking, wipers clacking. On the shelf beside the helm, the spare cap waited for its inevitable place on her head, claimed not by entitlement, but by merit as plain as steel. As the ship cleared the breakwater and met the tempered swell, the crew settled into the worn, resilient hum of people who have been brave and now must become steady. Emily glanced at the first officer and the helmsman, the same 2 faces from that terrible first rise of the sea, and found them watching her the way people watch a lighthouse they've come to trust. She felt heat climb her throat and turned it into a small grin. "Let's go hold the wind again," she said. And the big ship leaned toward open water, and the ocean, which respects stubbornness even when it does not admit it, made a little more room.